Aloha, Mora. Welcome back to fantas-fic. Yeah, and this week we're talking about Harry Potter and the methods of rationality like we talked about before. Oh boy, what a classic work of fan fiction. This one has quite the following and like 128 chapters.
Yeah, I thought this was supposed to be infamous for being bad, but apparently it's just famous.
Yeah, I guess it's actually just famous.
I think that was the other Harry Potter fanfic that I was remembering.
I mean, the other one could be so many others, because I'm sure there are many infamously bad Harry Potter fanfictions.
Yes.
But no, clearly a lot of work went into this one, and we're excited to read it out for you guys and talk about it.
We're reading the first chapter of this, but it's worth noting that according to the author, this fic is considered to get better or hit its stride around chapter 5. So if you hear our first chapter and hear our thoughts, maybe you want to read up to at least chapter 5.
Yeah, well, without further ado, here we go. Harry Potter and the Methods of Rationality by author Less Wrong. Beneath the moonlight glints a tiny fragment of silver, a fraction of a line. Black robes, falling. Blood spills out in liters, and someone screams a word. Every inch of wall space is covered by a bookcase. Each bookcase has 6 shelves, going almost to the ceiling. Some bookshelves are stacked to the brim with hardback books, science, maths, history, and everything else. Other shelves have 2 layers of paperback science fiction, with the back layer of books propped up on old tissue boxes or lengths of wood, so that you can see the back layer of books above the books in the front. And it still isn't enough. Books are overflowing onto the tables and the sofas, making little heaps under the windows. This is the living room of the house occupied by the eminent Professor Michael Vers Evans and his wife, Mrs. Petunia Evans Vers, and their adopted son, Harry James Potter Evans Vers. There is a letter lying on the living room table, and an unstamped envelope of yellowish parchment addressed to Mr. H. Potter in emerald green ink. The professor and his wife are speaking sharply at each other, but they are not shouting. The professor considers shouting to be uncivilized. "You're joking," Michael says to Petunia. His tone indicated that he was very much afraid that she was serious.
"My sister was a witch,"
Petunia repeated. She looked frightened, but stood her ground.
"Her husband was a wizard."
"This is absurd," Michael said sharply. "They were at our wedding! They visited for Christmas!"
"I told them you weren't to know,"
Petunia whispered.
"But it's true. I've seen things."
The professor rolled his eyes. "Dear, I understand that you're not familiar with the skeptical literature. You may not realize how easy it is for a trained magician to fake the seemingly impossible. Remember how I taught Harry to bend spoons? If it seemed like they could always guess what you were thinking, that's called cold reading."
"It wasn't bending spoons."
"What was it then?" Petunia bit her lip.
"I can't just tell you. You'll think I'm..."
She swallowed.
"Listen, Michael, I wasn't always like this."
She gestured at herself, as though to indicate her lithe form.
"Lily did this. Because I begged her. For years I begged her. Lily had always been prettier than me. I'd always been mean to her because of that. And then she got magic. Can you imagine how I felt? And I begged her to use some of that magic on me just so I could be pretty too. Even if I couldn't have her magic, if I could have been pretty."
Tears were gathering in Petunia's eyes.
"And Lily would tell me no, and make the most ridiculous excuses, like the world would end if she were nice to her sister, or sent her or told her not to. The most ridiculous things, and I hated her for it. And when I had just graduated from university, I was going out with this boy, Vernon Dursley. He was fat, but he was the only boy that would talk to me. And he said he wanted children, and his first son would be named Dudley. I thought to myself, what kind of parent names their child Dudley Dursley? It was like my whole future life was stretching out in front of me, and I couldn't stand it. I wrote to my sister, and I told her that if she didn't help me, I'd rather just..."
Petunia stopped.
"Anyway,"
Petunia said, her voice small.
"she gave in. She told me it was dangerous, and I said I didn't care anymore. And I drank this potion, and I was sick for weeks. But when I got better, my skin cleared up, and I had finally filled out, and I was beautiful. People were nice to me."
Her voice broke.
And after that, I couldn't hate my sister anymore, especially when I learned what her magic brought her in the end."
"Darling," Michael said gently. "You got sick. You gained some weight while resting in bed, and your skin cleared up on its own. Or being sick made you change your diet."
"She was a witch,"
Petunia repeated.
I saw it.
Petunia, Michael said. The annoyance was creeping into his voice. You know that can't be true. Do I really have to explain why? Petunia wrung her hands. She seemed to be on the verge of tears.
My love, I know I can't win arguments with you, but please, you have to trust me on this. Dad. Mom.
The two of them stopped and looked at Harry as though they'd forgotten there was a third person in the room. Harry took a deep breath.
Mom, your parents didn't have magic, did they? No,
Petunia said, looking puzzled.
Then no one in your family knew about magic when Lily got her letter? How would they get convinced?
Petunia said.
They didn't just send a letter. They sent a professor from Hogwarts.
Petunia's eyes flicked to Michael.
He showed us some magic. Then you don't have to fight over this,
Harry said firmly, hoping against hope that this time, just this once, they would listen to him.
If it's true, we can just get a Hogwarts professor here and see the magic for ourselves, and Dad will admit that it's true. If not, then Mom will admit its faults. That's what the experimental method is for, so that we don't have to resolve things just by arguing.
The professor turned and looked down at him, dismissive as usual. Oh, come now, Harry. Really. Magic. I thought you'd know better than to take this seriously, son, even if you're only 10. Magic is just about the most unscientific thing there is. Harry's mouth twisted bitterly. He was treated well, probably better than most genetic fathers treated their own children. Harry had been sent to the best primary schools, and when that didn't work out, he was provided with tutors from the endless pool of starving students. Always, Harry had been encouraged to study whatever caught his attention, bought all the books that caught his fancy, sponsored in whatever maths or science competitions he entered. He was given anything reasonable that he wanted. Except, maybe, the slightest shred of respect. A doctor teaching biochemistry at Oxford could hardly be expected to listen to the advice of a little boy. You would listen to show interest, of course. That's what a good parent would do. And so, if you conceived of yourself as a good parent, you would do it. But take a 10-year-old seriously? Hardly. Sometimes, Harry wanted to scream at his father.
Mom,
Harry said.
If you want to win this argument with Dad, look in Chapter 2 of the first book on the layman's lectures on physics. There's a quote there about how philosophers say a great deal about what science absolutely requires, and it's all wrong, because the only rule in science is that the final arbiter is observation, that you have to look at the world and report what you see. Off the top of my head, I can't think of where to find something about how it is an ideal of science to settle things by experiment instead of arguments.
His mother looked down at him and smiled.
Thank you, Harry, but...
Her head rose back up to stare at her husband.
I don't want to win an argument with your father. I want my husband to listen to his wife who loves him and trust her just this once.
Harry closed his eyes briefly.
Hopeless.
Both of his parents were just hopeless. Now his parents were getting into one of those arguments again. One where his mother tried to make his father feel guilty, and his father tried to make his mother feel stupid.
I'm going to my room,
Harry announced. His voice trembled a little.
Please, try not to fight too much about this, Mom. Dad. We'll know soon enough how it comes out, right?
Of course, Harry, said his father, and his mother gave him a reassuring kiss, and then they went on fighting while Harry climbed the stairs to his bedroom. He shut the door behind him and tried to think. The funny thing was, he should have agreed with Dad. No one had ever seen any evidence of magic, and according to Mum, there was a whole magical world out there. How could anyone keep something like that a secret? More magic? That seemed like a rather suspicious sort of excuse. It should have been a clean case for Mum joking, lying, or being insane in ascending order of awfulness. If Mom had sent the letter herself, that would explain how it arrived at the letterbox without a stamp. A little insanity was far, far less improbable than the universe really working like that. Except that some part of Harry was utterly convinced that magic was real, and had been since the instant he saw the putative letter from the Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Harry rubbed his forehead, grimacing. Don't believe everything you think, one of his books had said. But this bizarre certainty, Harry was finding himself just expecting that, yes, a Hogwarts professor would show up and wave a wand, and magic would come out. The strange certainty was making no effort to guard itself against falsification. Wasn't making excuses in advance for why there wouldn't be a professor, or the professor would only be able to bend spoons.
Where do you come from, strange little prediction?
Harry directed the thought at his brain.
Why do I believe what I believe?
Usually, Harry was pretty good at answering that question, but in this particular case, he had no clue what his brain was thinking. Harry mentally shrugged. A flat metal plate on a door affords pushing, and a handle on a door affords pulling, and the thing to do with a testable hypothesis is to go and test it. He took a piece of lined paper from his desk and started writing.
Dear Deputy Headmistress.
Harry paused, reflecting, then discarded the paper for another, tapping another millimeter of graphite from his mechanical pencil. This called for careful calligraphy.
Dear Deputy Headmistress Minerva McGonagall. Or whomever so it may concern. I recently received your letter of acceptance to Hogwarts, addressed to Mr. H. Potter. You may not be aware that my genetic parents, James Potter and Lily Potter, formerly Lily Evans, are dead. I was adopted by Lily's sister, Petunia Evans Verns, and her husband, Michael Verns Evans. I am extremely interested in attending Hogwarts, conditional on such a place actually existing. Only my mother Petunia says she knows about magic, and that she can't use it herself. My father is highly skeptical. I myself am uncertain. I also don't know where to obtain any of the books or equipment listed on your acceptance letter. Mother mentioned that you sent a Hogwarts representative to Lily Potter, then Lily Evans, in order to demonstrate to her family that magic was real, and, I presume, help Lily obtain her school materials. If you could do this for my own family, it would be extremely helpful. Sincerely, Harry James Potter Evans Vers.
Harry added their current address, then folded up the letter and put it in an envelope, which he addressed to Hogwarts. Further consideration led him to obtain a candle and drip wax onto the flap of the envelope, into which, using a penknife's tip, he impressed the initials HJPEV. If he was going to descend into this madness, he was going to do it with style. Then he opened his door and went back downstairs. His father was sitting in the living room and reading a book of higher maths to show how smart he was, and his mother was in the kitchen preparing one of his father's favorite meals to show how loving she was. It didn't look like they were talking to one another at all. As scary as arguments could be, not arguing was somehow much worse.
Mom,
Harry said into the unnerving silence.
I'm going to test the hypothesis. According to your theory, how do I send an owl to Hogwarts?
His mother turned from the kitchen sink to stare at him, looking shocked.
I don't know. I think you just have to have a magic owl.
That should have sounded highly suspicious. Oh, so there's no way to test your theory, then. But the peculiar certainty in Harry seemed willing to stick its neck out even further.
Well, the letter got here somehow,
Harry said.
So I'll just wave it around outside and call Letter for Hogwarts, and see if an owl picks it up. Dad, do you want to come and watch?
His father shook his head minutely and kept on reading.
Of course,
Harry thought to himself. Magic was such a disgraceful thing that only stupid people believed in. If his father went so far as to test the hypothesis, or even watch it being tested, that would be like associating himself with that. Only as Harry stumped out of the back door into the back garden did it occur to him that if an owl did come down and snatch the letter, he was going to have some trouble telling Dad about it.
But, well, that can't really happen, can it? No matter what my brain seems to believe. If an owl really comes down and grabs this envelope, I'm going to have worries a lot more important than what Dad thinks.
Harry took a deep breath and raised the envelope into the air. He swallowed. Calling out "Letter for Hogwarts" while holding an envelope high in the air in the middle of your own back garden was actually pretty embarrassing now that he thought about it.
No, I'm better than Dad. I'll use the scientific method, even if it makes me feel stupid. Letter,
Harry said, but it actually came out as more of a whispered croak. Harry steeled his will and shouted into the empty sky.
Letter for Hogwarts! Can I get an owl?
Harry? Asked a bemused woman's voice, one of the neighbors. Harry pulled down his hand like it was on fire and hid the envelope behind his back like it was drug money. His whole face was hot with shame. An old woman's face peered out from above the neighboring fence, grizzled grey hair escaping from her hairnet. Mrs. Figg, the occasional babysitter. What are you doing, Harry?
Nothing,
Harry said in a strangled voice.
Just testing out a silly theory.
Did you get your acceptance letter from Hogwarts? Harry froze in place.
Yes.
Harry's lips said a little while later.
I got a letter from Hogwarts. they said they want my owl by the 31st of July, but...
But you don't have an owl, poor dear. I can't imagine what someone must have been thinking sending you just the standard letter. A wrinkled arm stretched out over the fence and opened an expectant hand. Hardly even thinking at this point, Harry gave over his envelope. Just leave it to me, dear, said Mrs. Fig, and in a jiffy or two I'll have someone over. And her face disappeared from over the fence. There was a long silence in the garden. Then a boy's voice said, calmly and quietly,
What?
All right, well, hey, that's chapter 1 of Harry Potter and the Methods of Rationality, and I love your stylistic choice for Harry's voice.
Thank you.
Because, oh boy, is he a little shit in this one.
Yeah, he is.
Something they really, at least other characters are constantly talking about how much of a piece of shit he is later.
Yeah, this really is that one kid that, like, learned, like, a math problem and has to tell it to all the other kids, and, like, all the teachers have to listen to it, and they're like,
yeah, for sure.
Shut up, please.
It's like we all know the people in our lives that we grow up in, like, are talking about fiction books, and they're like, that's ridiculous, that doesn't make any sense. And this is kind of 128 chapters of that. That said, I thought it was pretty fun. And
that said, I thought this was hilarious.
Yeah, for sure. Like, especially it does pick up later too. Like chapters 4 and 5 are incredible.
Yeah.
What a great time. Because like Harry Potter is such an important part of
Draco Malfoy.
Draco Malfoy. The Draco Malfoy.
The Lucius Malfoy.
Is that the Professor McGonagall? I want to be in Gryffindor. Oh my god. And then the whole talk about how a well-placed hedge fund manager could destroy the entire economy of the Wizarding World. Like, there's smart stuff going on here. I feel like the person that wrote this wants to be the guy who writes XQCD.
Ooh, that's a pretty good comparison.
Yeah, because it's like that kind of humor, where, like, they have a lot of these smart concepts that they're applying to things that otherwise, like, are ignorant of those concepts. Like, yeah, I feel like it looks to do in most chapters to, like, find some key idea in, like, physics or philosophy or economics or something, and then show how Harry Potter doesn't, like, reflect
yes that. I think in one of the, like, descriptions of a chapter or something, or a warning, they talk about how they want to kind of be able to teach people about, like, the ideas of logic and how you can apply them to your daily life. Like, and that really does focus on being like, oh, this is what this logic problem is taught by these people, and you could apply it to your daily life.
Sure, yeah. Well, I'm definitely a big fan of teaching through comedy like this. That's for sure.
Yeah, like this first chapter, he's like, everyone knows that observation is the key to things, not arguments. Maybe readers should be aware that observation and experiment are important, not arguments.
That said, I very much my favorite line of this chapter is, off the top of my head, I can't think of where to find something about how it's an ideal of science to settle things by experiment instead of arguments. Because that is hilarious to me, how, like, this pinnacle of science about how you should always, like, look to test things, there's not a scientific way to prove that that's the right way to go about things, like, by following its own tenets. Like, I thought that was a very funny way to kind of tease at that point, at how you kind of just have to accept that this is the best way for a reason other than it tells you should accept.
Yeah.
It's kind of, I have a philosophy background, and that's kind of like a classic argument against some moral philosophical positions of, if you were to believe the tenets of that position, you would have no reason to actually believe the things that it says. Those are always funny. That said, it is a good way to go about gathering information, so.
Something about begging the question.
Yeah, exactly. This is a lot of fun, I gotta say. Just because, like, again, everyone kind of knows about the Harry Potter world and has had these thoughts of why it's kind of silly before, but this kind of takes it to extremes. Like, who would name their kid Dudley Dursley?
Yeah, that's a good line.
Yeah, and if you did have access to magic, why wouldn't you use it to make yourself look better and live a better life?
Yeah, and it's just got a lot of really funny lines. I'm not even always sure if they're intentional. Like, when it was just like, she gestured at herself as though to indicate her lithe form. It's like, that's just such a weird line. And all I can picture is they're doing like some like weird hand signals and like trying not to like just directly say it.
I'm picturing like she's got hands on her hips, or maybe she does the Beyonce put a ring on it dance. Something like that.
Yeah.
Uh-oh.
He was treated well, probably better than most genetic fathers treated their own children. Like,
Yeah.
who thinks in those words?
Exactly. Like, it's clearly a person who's like trying to use very technical and precise writing for the mind of like a 10-year-old or whatever he is, which is just kind of fun. Like, there's in a later chapter they talk about how Harry like bit his teachers, and it's just so out of left field because the entire rest of the time he's a fucking robot.
Yeah. He's just like, I promise not to bite anyone at Hogwarts.
Well, he promised not to bite anyone at Hogwarts unless they bit him
Oh,
first.
yes.
Yeah, exactly. I'm also a big fan
It's
of...
very rational.
There's also the part where the line's about you would listen to show interest because that's what a good parent would do. I'm a big fan of how the author used capitalization on show interest and good parent to kind of highlight the idea that his like the father character in this was doing those things because he wanted to act like how a good parent was, so that he could think of himself as a good parent rather than to raise his son well. That's just a fun little thing.
That's the one really weird thing is the familiar relationship is pretty like focused on being very sad.
Yeah, like this is, I don't want to say a broken home, but they're
it's
like
pretty weird because the author made the decision to like change up how it goes instead. Like it could have just been he's at the Dursleys, but they wanted it to be this, I think, so that it makes sense why Harry is like super rational. He's raised by a professor.
Yeah.
And stuff, but then like also it's just kind of the same relationship in some ways.
Right. Like there was definitely a chance here to have like a less like completely emotionally isolating childhood experience.
Yeah, he does. I know in later, like chapter 5 or 6 or something, he talks about like how he does love his parents, and he gets really upset at McGonagall suggesting that he was in some way abused, and he's like, I'm not gonna let you report them to child services. They never abused me and stuff. And it's like, that's just very dark and weird.
Yeah. So, the good news is that he's not around his parents for very long in this 128 chapter series. It is a little strange. But that's not really here or there. The author does a great job of what they're trying to do here, and I can see why this is as famous as it is.
Yeah.
I'm generally...
I like it.
Sorry, go for it.
I like it.
I like it too. That's a big thumbs up from me. I would go as far as to say that this is the best fanfiction we've read so far.
Quite possibly.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think the only Rage has a special place in my heart.
Oh yeah, for sure.
But otherwise, like all the other ones have just gone in blind, and this one's easily the best.
For sure. And again, like, there's a lot of funny stuff later. Like the whole economic system comparisons got me very, very, very roused.
Yeah, he's very obsessed with it too in a way that kind of makes sense, but it's also just very funny.
Yeah,
he keeps coming back to the idea like, if I get a spare week, I'm taking over the world.
Like the Harry character in this is a piece of shit, and you're not rooting for him, but he always makes it fun.
Yeah, he's a good character. You don't have to be good to be a good character. Just because you're a bad guy doesn't mean you're a bad guy. He's got like a solid characterization of like he's kind of amoral, but he's interested in people even though he doesn't quite understand them.
Sure.
He's interested in science, and he does understand that. He seems like he'd take over the world, but only to try to help.
Yeah.
Which might just be as bad, but at least like that's like a solid characterization bit for him.
I do love how you said amoral, not immoral.
I sort of know the difference properly.
Right. Yeah. It's just like he's just trying to like find the truth and figure things out. Because what a goddamn Ravenclaw.
I'm sure he's gonna end up in Ravenclaw.
Well, right. I'm not sure. I'm sure that they're gonna put the hat on his head or something, and he's gonna like fucking tear it to shreds, and it'll jump off a cliff or something.
Probably.
Yeah. There's no way that Sorting Hat makes it away from this kid unscathed. But in general, though, like, this is pretty smartly done. Like, a lot of the times, people will try to do a similar concept to this, where they're trying to take these scientific ideas and, like, they'll mess it up somehow, or the example they give isn't great. But I don't know. I mean, they weave them in pretty well.
Yeah, I think so much of it just hinges on the Harry character being so committed to being this, like, jerkish kid that knows too much.
Yeah.
And therefore it always makes sense for him to just be like, yes, I'm going to do a Fermian calculation.
And you gotta think that he's like this because the author knows about all of these things and probably really wants to, like, do this kind of shit in real life, but knows that people would get really mad at him.
Well, the real author is like a quantum physicist working on AI.
Yeah,
so they probably do this stuff in real life, and everyone's used to it.
So, like, they know that to actually do this stuff would be annoying, and that's why the other characters are acting like this. Is just, like, one of my favorite parts of it. Is I can't help but think of this as an outlet for them to, like, talk about these things and do these kind of experiments, and not have people get mad at them.
Yeah. Instead, people laugh with them.
Hell yeah.
Which is good.
Because laughter is history's greatest weapon.
Laughter is the real magic, just like friendship.
Laughter is the opium of the masses.
Do you think there's a chapter where Harry goes in on Marx?
There's probably a chapter where Harry is 10 and goes in on Narcs so he can take down the wizarding economy. I can't wait for it. I don't think... Are there ever really drugs in the Harry Potter world? Hold on.
I mean, aren't potions drugs, sort of?
Well, kind of, but, like, nobody's, like, sipping potions to get high, you know? At the school. Like, I'm wondering if there's ever just, like, actually magical drugs or people using potions or anything for highs. I don't think so. It's a real shame that J.K. Rowling missed this opportunity.
Yeah, it definitely seems like some of the world building of Harry Potter is a bit lacking outside of the school sometimes.
Yeah, for sure.
But that means you got space to explore when you're writing a fanfic about it. So you got the solid core of, like, the characters and the Hogwarts and a bit with Ministry of Magic and stuff and, like, the villain backstory. But then you can just kind of expand on what would happen. Be like, oh, well, obviously the Ministry of Magic must also have this department that does something because that's a problem that would actually exist that I've thought of.
Yeah. I kind of feel like the best Potter fanfictions would be stuff like Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them. Where you don't, like, you just ignore the school and look at other parts of the world that the books didn't explore, yeah. Or, like, look at horrors and the Ministry of Magic in, like, some cases. Like, you could do a totally great, like, L.A. Noire special victims unit of horrors looking at magical crimes. That could be a good time. There's a lot of possibilities for Harry Potter fanfiction here. But this one, it's a real classic, and it did not do what I just suggested. So hey, who knows? This guy's the expert.
This guy is the doctorate in Harry Potter or something.
Oh my god, how could I not even mention the black robes falling at the start too?
Oh yeah, it's just like a weird little poem,
right?
That I think supposed to be like Harry's parents being killed, maybe.
I think so, yeah. But, like, I make jokes about the crimson leaves falling haiku all the time because it was a joke on the practice SATs that I did way back when, and I've been making fun of that poem since then, just, like, bringing it up. Like, don't get me wrong, it's a good poem, and there's a lot of meaning in just those few lines, but it was just so funny to me at the time, and seeing it pop up here, oh man, that got me good. Black robes falling. Well, it just goes to show that science was the real magic all along. Sorry, hold on. It just goes to show that the real science were the friends we made along the way. It just goes to show that the real magic was the science we made along the way.
Yeah, and I hope that all of you listening will be the science along the way. And stick around.
Yeah.
We forgot to pick one for next time.
Whoops. And next time, we're gonna read something.
Yep. Next time will be a fanfic not about Harry Potter, because that's what we just did.
It sure won't be about Harry Potter. Oh boy. Well, Avada Kedavra, I say, killing the podcast.
The podcast dies.